15 months ago, I built and stocked this 2 foot by 4 foot continuous flow through worm bin. And so, better late than later, here's my 1 year update of owning and operating this 2x4 CFT. In this video, I'll go through my current setup, what I use for bedding and feeding, how I harvest, maintenance and time required, common issues including my biggest challenge, and finally the glorious benefits of stewarding a worm farm. Let's do this. I built this CFT specifically to fit inside a 2x4 tent, and I'm kinda glad I did. Although it's not mandatory by any means, I like that the tent keeps everything contained, the worms, the castings, the mess, the smell, and it keeps out the pests and also moderates the temperature. So other than the CFT in the tent, I use 2 small LED lights, one on the top and one on the bottom, just to keep those worms from wandering. And a couple mortar trays underneath, and that's my basic setup. I feed my worms predominantly table scraps, which mostly consists of spoiled and unused ends of fruits and vegetables. I probably give them a bag like this every week or so, supplemented with a worm chow every couple of days. When I feed them, I'll normally feed one side of the CFT at a time. I'll dump the feed, spread it out, cover it with fresh bedding, sprinkle with worm chow, and water it in. My bedding consists of mostly sifted peat moss and shredded cardboard, and sometimes I'll add things like coffee grounds. My worm chow is normally made up of ground oats, cornmeal, ground eggshells, and a pinch of sugar for the worms with a sweet tooth. I've been basically following this process for a year, and as you can see, it has resulted in a full CFT. This is what prompted me to finally start harvesting. So a couple months ago, I did my first harvest. Instead of using a tool, I just stuck my fingers up there, all around the pipes, and knocked loose the bottom couple of inches, letting them fall into the trays. And this is the final product. Unsifted, straight from the CFT. Perfectly good as is for my uses. So far, I've only harvested twice, as I don't need the castings right now, netting me maybe 50 to 60 liters. Doing the math, this CFT should hold around 350 liters when full, like it is now. I could harvest it all if I needed to, but I'll continue to harvest as needed out the bottom. Here's a hot tip. Despite most of the worms hanging out near the top and the food, the truth is worms are all over the bin and they'll be all up in your harvest. As suggested by Captain Matt, this may be the best way to migrate your worms on a small scale. Use 1/8-inch hardware cloth, cut it to the size of a tote, tape the edges, lay it on top of your recent harvest, put on a pile of bedding, sprinkle it with delicious worm chow, and water it in. Come back in a day or two and the majority of your harvest worms should have moved up above the cloth for easy extraction. That's the easiest way I've found. But harvesting your castings is probably the most time-consuming and messiest task you'll do when owning a worm bin. But in reality, it's not that bad. You'll make a mess, messing with worms, no doubt, but it's always a quick and easy cleanup. Other commonly mentioned issues with worm bins can be rodents and smell. I've found that both can be avoided if you bury your food when you're feeding. There was almost never a smell from my bin. One issue I did experience a couple times was too many mites in my bin, which often can be attributed to excessive food or moisture. Which brings me to the biggest challenge I've had with my CFT during the first year, and that was controlling the moisture content. I had it too wet for a while because my bedding was too wet and I was blending my food, which led to excessive mites, so I added a light bulb underneath, which dried it out, so dry that it led to entire corners of the castings falling through to the bottom before being fully processed. But thankfully now I have a good consistent moisture level in my bin, and the process that I use now maintains that level. And speaking of maintenance, this CFT and the worms require very little. Let's add up our tasks. It might take me an hour to make a few months worth of bedding. It takes 10 minutes to whip up a month's worth of worm chow. It's about an hour to harvest the bottom layer from the bin and maybe 10 minutes a week to feed them. Tally those all together and you realize an hour a week is plenty of time to look after a bin this size. And what do you get for your hour a week? If you're watching this video, you're probably already aware of the benefits of worm castings. Well, in a year or less, you should have produced 300 plus liters of black gold. Not bad. You'll also have recycled pounds and pounds of food waste. Bravo you! Not to mention you'll have tens of thousands of new adoring and squirming fans. I don't know how many worms I started this bin with. It was maybe 1,000 or 2 at most, and now there are tens of thousands of red wiggling little workers pooping out gold just for me. And don't forget, these guys can live up to 5 years, so treat them well. For anyone considering starting a worm farm in a CFT, a tote, or otherwise, I strongly recommend. Well, my friends, that's my 1 year update. We'll see you next time.